I found out my marriage was over from a stranger in a motorcycle helmet. He stood on my front porch in the pale Indianapolis morning, visor down, breath fogging the cold air. The leather of his gloves creaked as he held out a thick envelope with my name printed neatly across the front. "Mrs. Bootman?" he asked, already turning away, like this was just another stop on his route. I nodded. My hands were damp, smelling faintly of dish soap and bacon grease. I wiped them on my apron out of habit before taking the envelope. I remember thinking how heavy it felt, how something made of paper shouldn't weigh that much. I didn't know yet that it would split my life cleanly in two, without a single warning from the man sleeping down the hall in our guest room. An hour earlier, it had been an ordinary weekday morning, the kind I'd lived through hundreds of times. I stood at the stove, turning bacon in the pan, watching winter light crawl slowly across the kitchen tiles I'd scrubbed more times than I could count. Dennis sat at the table, scrolling on his phone, his expression distant like I was part of the furniture. Our daughter, Lena, talked nonstop about a school project, her voice bright and hopeful. He smiled at her like she was the center of his world. "Dad, can Mom come in and talk about my project?" she asked. He didn't look up. "We don't want to bother Mom," he said calmly. "She gets overwhelmed." The word landed hard. Overwhelmed. I heard lazy, fragile, too much. It slipped under my skin and stayed there. I'd been up late the night before sewing a patch back onto Lena's backpack. I'd packed her lunch, checked her homework twice, signed the permission slip she'd almost forgotten. But in his version of things, I wasn't capable. I was something to be managed, not respected. He took a bite of breakfast and frowned. "This bacon's too salty." "No thank you." No smile. Just another small correction, another reminder of where I ranked. I swallowed my reply with my coffee because I didn't want Lena to hear tension in my voice. I never did. After I dropped her off at school, the house felt hollow in a way I couldn't explain. The clock ticked too loudly. Every room echoed. I started the laundry, wiped down counters that were already clean, tried to convince myself the tightness in my chest was just fatigue, just age, just one of those mornings. Then the doorbell rang. The envelope sat in my hands like a brick. Downtown law firm letterhead, my name in cold black ink. My knees went weak before I even opened it. I had to sit at the kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast an hour earlier before I broke the seal. Petition for dissolution of marriage. The word swam, then sharpened. Dennis wanted a divorce. He wanted full custody of Lena. He described me as emotionally unstable. He said I had failed in my duties as a wife. He claimed I couldn't provide a safe home. Page after page, my husband wrote about me like I was a liability, a mistake he needed to correct. And then there was the money. He was asking the court to give him everything. The house, the savings, the retirement accounts, all of it. The justification was simple. I hadn't contributed financially. I was dependent. 38 years of meals, schedules, appointments, school projects, sick nights, quiet support when his job kept him awake and pacing, reduced to a few sentences that painted me as a burden. Heat spread across my face. My hands shook. This wasn't loud anger. It was sharp and contained, the kind that hums under your skin and refuses to let you breathe normally. On the last page was his signature. Calm, confident, dated 3 weeks earlier. 3 weeks of him eating my food, living in my house, kissing our daughter goodnight, while these papers waited to be delivered by a stranger. When I heard his key in the door that afternoon, I was still at the table. The petition lay open in front of me, every accusation exposed. He walked in, saw the envelope, and didn't bother pretending. "So," he said, setting down his briefcase, "you've read it." No apology, no explanation, just a statement, as casual as commenting on the weather. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded thin, unfamiliar. He loosened his tie and avoided my eyes. "Ruby, this has been coming for a long time. Don't make this dramatic." Dramatic. Another careful cut. "You're taking Lena," I whispered. "I'm requesting custody," he said evenly. You know you're not equipped to handle everything on your own. Unequipped, unstable, failed. The words from the petition echoed between us, heavy and rehearsed, like he'd practiced them. You moved the money, I said. You emptied the account. I earned it, he replied. I'm protecting my assets. You'll be fine. The court will make sure you get something. Something. Like an afterthought. In that moment, the house changed. The photos on the walls felt staged. The furniture felt borrowed. I was still standing in my kitchen, still wearing my apron, but it no longer felt like my home. It felt like his territory, and I realized, with a clarity that hurt, that I was no longer his partner. I was his problem. By the second week after the papers arrived, Dennis had moved into the guest room and turned our house into a place where I was constantly being measured and found lacking. He called it giving us space. That was the phrase he liked to use. This will be easier for everyone if we have a little space, he said, folding his shirts neatly and carrying them down the hall. What I heard was simpler. I don't want to sleep next to you anymore. Every night when that guest room door closed, it felt final, like another quiet confirmation that whatever respect he once had for me was gone. In front of Lena, he transformed. He became warm, attentive, generous. One afternoon, he came home early, swinging a large shopping bag in his hand. "Guess what, kiddo?" he said, kneeling in the living room. "Dad got you something special." He pulled out a brand new tablet, sleek and glowing, far more expensive than anything we'd ever discussed. Lena shrieked and threw her arms around his neck. I watched from the doorway, my stomach tightening. Months earlier, we had agreed we wouldn't make big purchases without talking first. I reminded him quietly, "Dennis, we said no expensive electronics right now." He didn't even look at me. "Ruby, don't start," he said, still smiling at Lena. "It's just a tablet. Don't make her feel bad for being happy." The words stung. He made it sound like I was the one taking something away, like I was cruel for caring about money or boundaries. My throat closed up. I wanted to say I was scared, that everything felt unstable, that I didn't recognize our life anymore. Instead, I stayed silent, because Lena was still smiling, and I refused to be the villain in that moment. It continued at dinner. If I cooked chicken, it was dry. If I asked Lena about school, he interrupted and answered for her. When I reminded her to clear her plate, he laughed lightly and said, "You know how your mom is. She likes everything just so." The tone was gentle enough to sound harmless, but the message wasn't. He was teaching our daughter to see me as difficult, controlling, someone to tolerate instead of trust. I could feel something shifting, slowly, painfully. One morning, I logged into our joint emergency savings account. The balance was zero. Line after line showed transfers to an account number I didn't recognize. My chest tightened until it hurt. That money was meant for emergencies, for medical bills, for Lena's future. He had taken every dollar without a word. I sat there staring at the screen, the glow of the laptop harsh in the quiet room, and felt anger spread through me, cold, steady, undeniable. He hadn't just erased me on paper. He had erased me financially, too. I opened my jewelry box, hoping I might find something to sell so I could hire a decent lawyer. It was almost empty. My mother's necklace was gone. The bracelet he gave me for our 10th anniversary was gone. Only a cheap pair of earrings lay at the bottom. My hands went numb. These weren't just valuables. They were pieces of my life, my memories. I imagined him choosing what to take, deciding what parts of me were worth keeping. I called an old friend from church and told her everything, my voice shaking despite my efforts to stay calm. She gave me the number of a lawyer named Elliot Garner. His office sat above a nail salon on the east side, with faded carpet and mismatched chairs. Walking in, I felt small and embarrassed, like my entire life had been reduced to this cramped waiting room. But Elliot looked at me directly and listened without interrupting, and that alone almost broke me. He spread the divorce papers across his desk and adjusted his glasses. "These photos," he said, tapping images of my cluttered living room. When were they taken? I told him it was the week I had a fever and could barely get out of bed. He nodded slowly. He waited until you were sick, Elliot said quietly, and then took pictures. The calm way he said it made it worse. Dennis had watched me shiver on the couch and reached for a camera instead of helping me. Then came the credit card statements, luxury stores, hotels, restaurants in cities I hadn't visited in years. He's claiming these charges are yours, Elliot said. My anger flared again. While I clipped coupons and stretched groceries, he had been spending freely under my name, building a story where I was reckless and irresponsible. Finally, Elliot slid another report across the desk. This is from a child psychologist in Ohio, he said. She claims you're unstable and harmful to your daughter. I stared at the pages, at the version of me described there. Angry, neglectful, unfit. I've never met her, I said. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Something inside me hardened. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was an attack. That night, Dennis came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. He said he'd taken Lena to Riverland Adventure Park to give her a break from the tension. The meaning was clear. I was the tension. When Lena repeated his words later, "Mom, you're really stressed lately," the pain cut deeper than any insult he'd thrown at me. Every action, every carefully chosen phrase showed me the truth. Dennis wasn't just leaving. He was rewriting our story, and he wanted our daughter to believe it. The first time I walked into the Marion County Family Court building, I felt like I was stepping into a place where my life had already been decided without my consent. The hallway smelled like burnt coffee and cleaning solution. Shoes clicked sharply against the floor. People in suits moved quickly, confident, purposeful, as if they belonged there. I clutched my folder so tightly, my fingers ached. Elliot walked beside me, steady and composed, explaining what would happen next, but my heart was pounding so hard I barely heard him. I felt exposed, like every step forward was a confession I hadn't agreed to make. In the mediation room, Dennis sat straight-backed in his chair, wearing a dark suit that made him look serious and respectable. Beside him was his attorney, Victor Lang. Perfect hair, polished smile, the kind of man who looked trustworthy on a billboard. They both stood when the mediator entered, polite and professional, as if this were a contract negotiation instead of a fight over my child. The mediator asked whether there was any chance of reaching an agreement. Elliot spoke calmly about shared custody, about keeping Lena's routine stable, about minimizing disruption. I held my breath. For just a second, I let myself believe Dennis might look at me and remember who I was, who we had been. Victor didn't look at me at all. My client has serious concerns regarding the child's well-being, he said evenly. Mrs. Bootman is unable to provide a stable environment. We will be seeking full custody. The words dropped heavily into the room, concerned for the child. They burned. Dennis sat quietly, hands folded, allowing Victor to speak for him, as if he truly believed I was a threat instead of Lena's safe place. I searched his face for hesitation, for guilt, for anything human. There was nothing. My resentment rose slowly, thick and heavy. He knew exactly what kind of mother I was. He had watched me build our daughter's life piece by piece, and still he stayed silent while I was reduced to a risk factor. When Victor added, "We are prepared to present evidence of emotional instability and neglect," my chest tightened. Neglect. The word felt obscene. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to shout that they were lying. I wanted to pound the table and demand they stop. Instead, I forced my voice to stay low. That isn't true. I didn't break. Not for them. Not yet. I was holding myself together for Lena, even though she wasn't there. The hearing came faster than I expected. The courtroom was cold, all dark wood and rigid rules. Dennis sat at one table with Victor, wearing an expression that suggested worry and responsibility. I sat with Elliot, feeling like I had wandered into someone else's nightmare. Victor began with the photos. One by one, he held them up. Toys scattered across my living room, dishes in the sink, blankets piled on the couch. "This is the environment the child is kept in," he said. He didn't mention my fever. He didn't mention Dennis walking past me while I shook under a blanket to document the mess. Every time he said the child instead of Lena's name, it felt deliberate. She was evidence to him. She was everything to me. Then came the credit card statements. Victor spoke of reckless spending and luxury purchases, all charged in my name. I thought of the nights I clipped coupons and stretched meals, while Dennis told me we needed to be careful. I understood now how carefully he had been crafting this version of me. The unfairness made my hands tremble. I had given everything quietly, and still I was being accused of taking too much. When Dr. Marissa Kent was called to testify, my stomach dropped. She walked to the stand in a fitted suit, confident and composed. I recognized her perfume before her face. It was the same scent Dennis sometimes carried home. She met my eyes briefly, then looked past me, like I was irrelevant. She described me as unpredictable, emotional, a source of strain. She claimed she had observed us in public settings. I wanted to scream that she had never spoken to me, never watched us, never known us. Instead, I sat frozen as she narrated my life like a case study. Then she said, "The father presents calm structure. The mother appears overwhelmed and unable to cope." The words struck something old and deep. I heard my father's voice from years ago standing in a doorway telling me I was too much, that no one would ever want to deal with me. Hearing the same judgment echoed in a courtroom, with Dennis nodding along, felt like my past and present collapsing into one accusation. I felt small in a way I hadn't felt in decades. When I took the stand, my legs felt heavy. Elliot asked gentle questions, and I answered carefully. I explained the photos, the illness, the money I never spent. Then Victor stood for cross-examination. He asked why I cried, why Lena sometimes grew quiet around me, whether I had ever lost control. Then he showed a photo of me sitting on my bed, face swollen from crying, taken through a half-open door. Dennis had taken it on a night he told me I was useless. Seeing that moment displayed in public shattered something inside me. My voice wavered. Tears filled my eyes. I tried to stop them, but I couldn't. Victor tilted his head slightly and said, "Take your time, Mrs. Bootman." I understood exactly what he wanted, and I gave it to him. I broke down, gasping, exposed. I hated myself for it. I could feel the judge watching, seeing exactly what they wanted him to see. When I stepped down, I felt hollow. The judge's face revealed nothing, but I saw the way his eyes lingered on Dennis, sympathetic. As we left, Dennis rested a hand on Victor's shoulder and smiled, small, satisfied. That smile hurt more than everything else. Walking down the courthouse steps, I truly believed I had just watched my family slip through my fingers. On the morning the judge was supposed to decide whether I could keep my own child, the sky over Indianapolis was clear and painfully bright. The cold air felt sharp in my lungs. It seemed wrong, almost insulting, that the day looked so calm, while my entire future waited on a few sentences spoken by a stranger. I sat at the table beside Elliot, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles throbbed. I tried to keep my face neutral, steady, but inside everything was shaking. Across the room, Dennis leaned toward Victor, relaxed, confident. He laughed quietly at something Victor whispered just before the judge entered. That sound stayed with me. It was light, easy, like he hadn't spent months dismantling my life, like he hadn't described me on legal documents as a liability to be removed. Dr. Marissa Kent sat behind them in the gallery, legs crossed, hair flawless, perfume drifting faintly when she moved. She wore the same soft, reassuring smile she'd worn on the stand. Every time I saw it, I heard her voice again, unpredictable, overwhelmed. She had taken my worst moments and shaped them into a story where Dennis was the steady parent and I was the risk. Watching her lean forward now, eager, expectant, my resentment tightened until it hurt. When the judge entered, we all stood. Then he began reviewing the case. His voice was measured, careful. He mentioned the documented financial concerns. I thought of the credit card charges I had never made, of Dennis sitting silently while they were laid at my feet. He spoke of the photographs of the home environment. I felt the memory of that fever week wash over me, the chills, the blanket, the quiet click of a camera. When he referenced the expert testimony of Dr. Kent, my stomach turned. Each phrase sounded like a step farther away from Lena. Dennis watched the judge closely, nodding at the right moments, playing the role perfectly. Victor sat composed, hands folded, looking earnest and serious, as if he truly believed he was protecting a child. That almost made it worse. Cruelty wrapped in righteousness is harder to fight than open malice. As the judge continued, I felt the direction of his thinking even before he reached the end. He talked about stability, structure, routine, the same words Dennis and Marissa had used. My heart sank. For a brief, desperate moment, I wondered if fighting had been a mistake. Maybe I should have accepted whatever scraps Dennis offered, anything that allowed me to see my daughter. Then I remembered Lena's hand in mine when she crossed busy streets, her voice calling for me after bad dreams, the way she curled against me when she was scared. The idea that lies, spoken confidently in a courtroom, could erase all of that made my resentment flare into something almost unbearable. The judge paused, glanced down at his notes, and began, "Given the evidence presented." My throat closed. I looked down at my hands because I couldn't bear to see Dennis's face when he heard he had won. Then a small voice broke the silence. "Your Honor, excuse me." I looked up sharply. Lena stood near the door, still in her school uniform, backpack on her shoulders, hair slightly tangled like she'd rushed. The room froze. My heart dropped, but not in the same way. She wasn't supposed to be there. I saw panic flash across Dennis's face before he masked it. Victor half-turned in his chair. Marissa went completely still. "Young lady," the judge said, frowning, "you can't be in here without— I need to show you something," Lena said. Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "It's important. Mommy doesn't know." Those words cut through me. She had done something on her own, something serious. Dennis jumped to his feet. "Lena, go outside," he snapped, all calm gone. "Now." The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Calloway, sit down. Let her speak." That single sentence felt like the first crack in a wall I'd been pressed against for months. Lena walked forward and pulled her old cracked tablet from her backpack. I hadn't realized she still used it. She held it carefully, like it contained something fragile and powerful. "I recorded something," she said quietly, "at home, when Dad and Dr. Kent were talking." The air shifted. Dennis's face drained of color. Marissa's fingers tightened around her purse. My resentment surged again, tangled now with something dangerous and hopeful. The tablet was connected to the screen. The image flickered, then settled on my living room, filmed from a low angle. I recognized the plant in the corner. On the couch sat Dennis and Marissa, relaxed, laughing, no masks. Hearing their voices made my stomach twist. Dennis joked about how easy this would be. Marissa talked about choosing the right language to make me look unstable. They discussed money he had moved, plans they had made, how to push me until I broke on the stand. They talked about selling the house, about starting fresh with Lena, like I was something old they were leaving behind. Each sentence felt like proof of every doubt I'd ever swallowed. All the times Dennis told me I was imagining things, that I was too sensitive, unraveled in front of everyone. Dennis shoved his chair back, the scrape loud and ugly. "Turn that off," he snapped, moving forward, but court officers stepped in front of him. Seeing him stopped, felt unreal. Marissa stood too, clutching her bag. The judge's voice cut through the room, sharp and firm. "Sit down, both of you." When the video ended, the silence was heavy. The judge looked at the screen, then at Dennis, then at Marissa, and finally at me. His expression had changed. The distance was gone. In its place, I saw recognition, not pity, not doubt, understanding. The resentment inside me didn't vanish, but it shifted. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt that the truth had finally entered the room. When the video stopped, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. No one moved. The final frozen image on the screen showed my living room, the couch where Dennis and Marissa had sat laughing and planning, as if our life together were nothing more than a set of pieces they could rearrange at will. I stared at it and thought of every time Dennis had told me I was too sensitive or imagining things. Now his own voice hung in the air, saying exactly what he had done. The judge turned to Dennis first. "Mr. Calloway," he said, his tone low and controlled, "would you like to explain what the court has just heard?" Dennis straightened, reaching for that calm, reasonable voice I knew so well. "Your Honor, this was taken out of context," he said. "We were under a great deal of stress. Things were said that weren't meant seriously." Hearing him reduce months of planning and deception to a moment of stress made something flare hot inside me. He was still trying to shrink his choices into something minor, something forgivable. Marissa spoke next. Her voice was softer now. "I misjudged the situation," she said. "I only wanted what was best for the child." That phrase hurt more than I expected. She had sat in my home and laughed about making me look unstable, and now she wrapped herself in concern and good intentions, as if she could claim Lena's well-being as her shield. The judge's expression hardened. He turned slightly toward the officers. "This matter will be referred to the prosecutor's office," he said, "for investigation into perjury, fraud, and conspiracy." Hearing those words felt surreal. I had known in my bones that what they did was wrong, but hearing it named out loud made my chest ache. It was relief, yes, but it was also a reckoning. As the officers moved closer, Dennis looked back at me. There was no regret in his eyes, only anger at being exposed. Even now, he couldn't admit what he had tried to do to me and to our daughter. Victor raised his hands slightly. "Your Honor, I had no knowledge of this recording or of this conduct," he said quickly. His voice stayed smooth, but fear edged through it. A cold thought crossed my mind. He had been more than willing to use every word against me when he believed he would win. Now that the truth was visible, he wanted distance from the damage he had helped create. Then the judge looked at me. His voice softened. "Mrs. Bootman," he said, "based on what the court has seen and the totality of the evidence, I am dismissing your husband's petition. Full custody of your daughter is awarded to you. You may file your own petition for divorce, and this court will give it priority." For a moment, I couldn't speak. Months of being called unstable, unfit, overwhelmed pressed against my ribs all at once. I managed to nod and say, "Thank you, Your Honor." But a bitter thought stayed with me. It had taken a child risking everything with a hidden recording for my truth to be believed. The weeks that followed moved quickly and sharply. Accounts Dennis had emptied were frozen. Marissa lost her position. There were more hearings, this time with them answering questions. I watched Dennis stand in a plain suit that suddenly looked too large on him. When the judge outlined the charges and possible prison time, he finally dropped his eyes. Part of me felt vindicated. Another part felt deeply tired. He still insisted, through his lawyer, that things had gone too far, that he never meant harm. Each attempt to soften what he'd done kept my resentment alive. He never said the one thing that mattered, that he had tried to take my child and my future because he believed he could. When the divorce was finalized, the house was awarded to me, and the court protected a share of the assets for Lena and me. I walked through those rooms one last time, touching the walls and counters I had cleaned for years. I remembered Dennis laughing in that kitchen while plotting against me, and I knew I couldn't stay. I sold the house and bought a smaller place outside the city. It wasn't grand, 3 bedrooms, a modest yard, but when I unlocked the door for the first time, I felt something steady and real. It was mine. From that kitchen, I started a small catering business, first for neighbors, then for small events. When people praised the food, I felt a quiet, stubborn satisfaction. I could still hear Dennis's old comments, "Too salty, too heavy, you'll never make a living at this." And every compliment felt like a gentle answer to all of it. One afternoon, months later, Lena and I sat in a park near our new home. She swung high, laughing, hair flying in the sunlight. When she came to sit beside me, I asked the question that had lived in my chest. "Why did you record them that day?" I asked. "How did you know to do that?" She looked down at her hands. "I heard Dad and Dr. Kent talking once," she said quietly. "They said you were going to lose me. I remembered you telling me that if someone is doing something wrong, you need proof. I was scared they'd take it if they found it." Her words hit harder than anything else. My resentment shifted into something deeper. They hadn't just hurt me. They had forced a 9-year-old girl to protect her own family. I pulled her close. "You should never have had to do that," I said, "but I'm so proud of you." As the sun set, we walked home together. Our life was smaller now, simpler, but it was ours. Anger still surfaced sometimes, but it no longer defined me. I knew, finally, that I was more than the version of myself Dennis had tried to erase. That night, standing alone in my quiet kitchen, I understood something clearly. Love does not require you to disappear. And if someone listening feels like they are fading inside their own home, I hope they remember this. You never have to beg to be seen, and you are allowed to choose yourself before someone else chooses to erase you.